Hey, everybody. Welcome to SBA Live. We're so happy to be here today. I'm Nikki with Full Circle Aftercare. I'm Director of Operations here and the planner of all the things behind the scenes, which is what I normally do. And we have Matt with us again today. He hasn't been able to be with us a lot lately, and we're so happy to have you here, Matt.
Thank you, Nikki. It's great to be here. I have definitely missed being in office for a couple months, but it's great to be back.
And we're happy to have you back. So not the same without you. Well, we are actually going to do a two-part series. So today we're going to talk about estate planning. And then when we come back on August 1st, we're actually going to be talking about probate. And we're going to have a guest on to talk about probate. So we're super excited because estate planning is important.
Absolutely. It is critical. And especially talking to, over 1,000 families a month, we see over and over again the difference between someone who has a plan and someone who doesn't, and just what kind of a peace of mind that provides, and so much less work to do.
Right? Absolutely. So estate planning. Here we go. I had to get the slides going right. So first of all, we have to do a disclaimer. Matt and I, neither one of us are estate attorneys. We're not financial planners. We're not tax advisors. So the things we're going to be talking about today are guidelines and advice, but not necessarily professional advice. So we just have to say that to cover ourselves, and then we can move on and talk about all the good stuff. So
that's what we say with every one of our aftercare appointments too. Hey, we're not attorneys. Do not ask us legal advice. We will not give you any. But this information is general, and everyone should take the information we learned today and go talk to one of those professionals, because they'll be able to help them with their specific scenarios and situations.
Absolutely. So D.A. Davidson and Company released a survey, and the results reveal that only 1 in 3 Americans actually has an estate plan. That's 34%. That's incredibly low. I was under the impression it was hovering about half. It's kind of disheartening, though. Yeah. And then 30% of those respondents reported that they don't have an estate plan because they feel they don't have enough money to warrant one, which is crazy.
That is so sad. So I would actually challenge this a little bit. Everybody has an estate plan. True. It's just whether it's your plan or the government's plan, right? Because the government has something in place for everyone, right? That needs laws that need to be followed and process that needs to be followed. So you can just default let the government decide what happens to your estate and your assets, or you can make the plan yourself. And I would say, I don't know if this is accurate, but just from my experience, the third of Americans who do have an estate plan, I would say 60 or 70% of those have problems with them. They're trusts that aren't funded, they're documents that are out of date, there are things that haven't been moved into those plans, and so they become kind of null and void. So it's kind of a bleak outlook.
It actually is, and we see that a lot here at Full Circle, where families think they have something in place and they actually don't, or it wasn't updated when it needed to be updated, which then you might as well not have one, because then it's at the mercy of the court system. So,
right.
Yeah.
And even with the 37% responders say they don't have enough money, you'd be shocked at the amount of trouble that $100 in a bank account can cause a family. And it might not be those things, but I think that even more than dividing out the assets, look, when assets get moved to new generations, feelings get hurt.
Yeah.
And so having a plan that makes things fair and equitable is going to be more than just deciding what to do with your $5,000 or $10,000 or $50,000 or $100,000. It's going to keep family relationships intact. And so I don't care how much money you have, you should have an estate plan.
Yes, they're entirely necessary whether you have a large estate or not.
Right.
Because people, we see this all the time. Someone says, well, my mom doesn't have an estate. She doesn't have anything. And estates aren't just assets. They're debts. The estate is debt. The estate is all of the things that come in the mail. The estate is all the things sitting in the house. Like there's so many things. Every one of us has an estate.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get a lot of people when we start our process. In fact, we're now changing the language because so many people, when we start talking to them saying, we're an estate specialist or helping with the estate, they're saying, I don't have an estate. They're wrong. Everyone has an estate, right? It might be big or small, but our lives touch so many different companies and things we own and assets. Every single one of those things are part of our estate and have to be dealt with by our loved ones. So it's either our plan and our guidance that's going to help our loved ones do that, or it's the government's.
Absolutely. So we're going to go over kind of the steps that this involves. So yes, everyone should have an estate plan. If not for yourself, then for everyone who was left to deal with it when you're gone. And today we're going to be talking about those steps. So step one is to start thinking about your plan. That's the first step, is to even consider having one. Step two, do you need a will or a living trust? Step three, what about probate? It's a scary word for most people. And step four, special circumstances. So we'll start with step one. Step one, it is important to start thinking about your plan because some of the biggest hurdle is understanding why you need one and actually facing it to do it. None of us like to think about when we die, what's going to happen. Nobody likes to think about that. But it's very, very, very important to have your documents organized. If you don't have a list of the things that you have, it is incredibly difficult for your family to get in there and take care of things. So you should document your bank accounts, investments, credit cards. If you have a will or a trust, they need to have that paperwork. It's incredibly hard to find if there is not a copy available. And we run across that all the time where they don't have the copy of the will or they don't have the copy of the trust. Have you seen that, Matt?
I have, and they feel lost, and then it's like not having it.
Right? Yeah. I mean, there really is nowhere a will is filed until you need to file it after someone passes away. So it's really, really important to have copies, then give them to the people who need to have them, and the trust.
Yeah, I think with the organizing the important documents, it does need to be in one place, and your family needs to know where that is. Because I think the comment we hear all the time is, yeah, I think Dad had one. Where?
Exactly.
I mean, I have a hard enough time finding my own documents. I have this little filing drawer right here next to me, and I put important documents in there. And I thought I had put my trust in here. We had an attorney in, and I wanted to show him my trust. And I'm looking. I couldn't find it. I was like, I swear I put it in here. It ended up had kind of fallen down in the back, but that was my own documents, and I knew where I had placed it, and yet it took me a long time to find it. And if that's me and my own thing, imagine what your kids are going to do when they have no clue where you put it.
Exactly. And a lot of people will put them in like a box at the bank. What do they call them? Having a mind blank.
Like a safety deposit box?
Safety deposit box. That's the word I wanted. But what they don't realize is if they don't give the loved one the key to that, it requires probate to even open the box to get to the documents. So
that's exactly right.
Yes, there's a lot of trouble there. I remember when my grandpa passed away and he was a carpenter, he built all these tiny little cubby cupboards all over his house and nobody could find his will. So they're like looking in every single little place and they never found it. They ended up having to just take care of it through the courts. So it's super important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then
update it from time to time.
Yes, that's the next thing on our list is make sure it's updated. That is extremely, extremely important. We've seen cases where, one parent has passed and the next parent has passed and then no one updated the beneficiaries on the life insurance. It's a problem.
Yep. And that now needs to be probated.
Yes.
Right. And that is now a hassle for those kids rather than being able to pay your debts off right away. it's going to be a year or two before they're going to be able to do that, and dealing with that mess in the interim.
Oh, it's entirely confusing. And a lot of families simply don't have the money to upkeep things while they're waiting for probate to complete. It's a hardship.
The hardest situation, the saddest story I ever heard on this one, or that I dealt with on this one, was a gentleman who had been married, and he had planned out his estate, but he was only married for 6 months in his 20s. And he had just been inheriting his grandpa's farm and starting a life and getting life insurance, and his wife left him. And so a couple years later, he met a new woman. They got married. They had children together. They had lived on this farm for years and years, and he ended up having a heart attack in his mid-40s. So I'm helping the widow. Well, guess what? Nothing had been updated.
Oh gosh.
It was all with the first wife. He'd only married her for 6 months, and she suddenly saw this windfall profit and didn't want to give it up. And how awful that it was in danger. His kids and his wife were going to get kicked out of their home and out of their livelihood running this farm and everything, just because these things weren't updated.
Yeah. Another situation I've seen is a person had a whole bunch of old vehicles sitting on their property and didn't realize that even though they're junkers, nobody can move any of those vehicles off a property without the title for every single one of them.
That's right.
Yes. So it's important to have that kind of paperwork as well. Everyone wants their assets to go to the correct person. I mean, that's really the ultimate goal in any of this kind of planning, is to take care of your loved ones after you're gone.
Yeah, absolutely. Their lasting memory of you should be all the great times together, and not the mess that you created by leaving without a plan.
Yes, absolutely. So we'll move on to step 2. And a financial planner or a estate attorney is great to get all of that going. So, or both. Might need both. Yeah. I'm going to let you take this one, Matt. Do you need a will or living trust? Because an attorney can advise you on what best fits your needs. And I know that you know more about this than I do. But how do wills and trusts work? And can I have just a will? Do I need a trust? How does that work?
This is a great question. So it's kind of actually a misnomer, because nobody has a trust without a will, right? Yeah. But people can have a will without a trust. And so what does that mean? Well, a will is basically just, this is what I want to have happen, right? It's an official document saying, I want all of my things to go to my favorite child, and all the rest of them get nothing, right? Whatever that will says, it's the plan, right? So what is a trust? What's the difference between a will and a trust? A trust owns the things you own, basically. So if you think about it, with the difference that the United States has from a lot of other countries, is we were one of the first countries to allow people to have private ownership, right? And we believe that's very, very important, to allow people to own things on their own. But in order to own something, you have to have a chain of title, right? You might not need that for a pencil, but you probably need it for a car or a house or something of real value. And so there's this chain of title going from one person to the next person as you transfer that asset from person to person. Well, when you die and that title is in someone else's name, it can't be transferred to your loved ones, right? And so what does a trust do? Well, a trust owns your things. You own the trust, and the trust owns your assets. And the nice thing about a trust is it can't die. So yeah. So I always tell this to my employees, look at this this roll of tape, right? This roll of tape, I own it, but I don't own it, because I own Full Circle Aftercare. Full Circle Aftercare owns this, and I own Full Circle Aftercare. So I can do whatever I want with this. I can throw it away. I can give it to someone, because I control both Full Circle Aftercare. Therefore, I control this. But if I die, whoever Full Circle Aftercare goes to, or if I sold it, if I sell it to you, Nikki, and I say, hey, this business is now yours, I no longer have control on what happens to this tape roll, but you do. Now, from the tape roll's perspective, its owner never changes. It's always owned by Full Circle Aftercare. Who controls Full Circle Aftercare? It doesn't care, but it's always owned by that. So that link of title never changes. So I think I'm kind of getting off base here, but the trust is something that owns our assets for us. And so because a trust can't die, what will happen is the ownership of the assets doesn't have to transfer, but then who controls that trust does when we die. Now, can your kids do whatever they want with it when you die? No, because a trust always, always, always has a will. And the trust has to follow the will. So the will is saying, this is what I want done with my assets. And the trust is the thing that owns those assets and allows you to transfer it. So do I need a will or a trust? Well, if I don't have any assets of value, I'm probably not going to trigger probate, so I don't need a trust, right? However, if I have assets of value, especially investments accounts, like it says here, investment accounts, if I have real estate of any type, if I have vehicles of higher value, I should have a trust carrying those things over, right?
It makes life so much easier, and you can put in the trust who you want to be in charge, and that person actually becomes a fiduciary. They are bound
Right
by that document to be able to make sure that it happens the way it's supposed to.
Yeah, and that's what one thing that both a will and a trust will do is it will name the person who should be the executor, the person who is now in charge of dividing these things up, and they are bound by that document.
Yes. And that's, I mean, if nobody is bound, and even if you go to probate because you don't have a trust or a will, there still are all the things that are in your home and all of the things that just can cause fights. People think, oh, I love that lamp and everyone else loves that lamp. You know what I mean?
Right.
It causes craziness.
Yeah. All right. So what happens if they've already passed and probate is triggered?
You know, everyone is afraid of the word probate, but really all it is a process. Probate is the process of taking a will, or if there's not a will, and putting someone in place to make all of the things happen. It's the legal process to appoint someone else to be in charge. Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you think about it this way, you know, I talked about that chain of ownership that goes from person to person. Well, the last person on the title is now passed away. You can't have a completed chain to the next person because the deceased person cannot sign that title, right? Even if they say, I really, really, really want it to go to that person, doesn't matter. It has to be them signing that document. And so the process of probate is the judge, because the judge rules in our land, the judge now gives that authority to another party, right? And so the judge isn't selling your property for you, but the judge connects that link from the person who's passed away to the person who is the survivor or the executor of the estate, right? And so the judge is saying, all right, you now, the son, has the legal authority to sell this property or to keep the property or divide out these assets as needs be. But that judge is the one who creates that link in the chain to go to that new person and allows them to do whatever the will says. And
Exactly.
so it's really giving authority to the executor is what probate is. It's giving authority to the executor of what needs to happen. And then in some cases, if there's no will involved, in some cases it might be giving the authority to an executor and then also giving direction to the executor of how those assets are divided. If you have a will in place, the probate process is just going to be selecting the executor. If you don't have a will in place, then it's going to be selecting that executor and then dictating to that executor exactly how those assets will be divided, which is why that's the government plan. That's not your plan.
Exactly. We heard an interesting story a couple weeks ago when one of our attorney referral partners was in office, and he said he had a client who took the will down to the bank and was like, "Look, right here, I'm executor." And they took one look at the will and said, "No, you're not." Because the probate process has to happen to officially appoint someone. It's basically like you're nominated to be that person, but it takes the probate process to put it into place.
Yeah, I love how he said that the will nominates who that person's going to be, right? But it's the judge who sets it up.
Yes. So the judge will authenticate that will. They'll appoint the executor and go through all of the steps. There's lots of paperwork, but then at the end, the family is left with letters of testamentary so that they can take those letters, and that is what actually proves who is able to transfer the property and such.
Right. But once again, the reason why that's not necessary in a trust is because that ownership never changed, right? So the ownership of those assets, like once again, right, Full Circle Aftercare owns this roll of tape, and since that never changed, we don't have to create this new link in the chain. We don't have to say this person has authority. I can just say, Nikki, you have authority to do with this what you wish, right?
Mhm.
I can grant that authority within that cell. I can't do that with just a normal asset. You can't go to a bank account and be like, you can't go to my bank and say, Matt said that I now have control of his money. He said I shouldn't. Look, he wrote it on a sticky note. Here's my sticky note that says Matt gave me control of his money. The bank's can be like, I can't just let you have control, right? And so that's what the probate is saying. The judge said I now have control of this money. Well, that's different.
Absolutely. And we don't have to be scared of probate. Too many families are, but they don't need to be scared of it. Many families think that the will is enough to protect the assets. It is not. The will is just the directive on what to do through probate or part of the trust so that we don't have to do the probate at all. Typically, the biggest trigger for probate is when there is real estate owned, real property, and there's not another person listed on that deed. And if you're uncertain where or who is listed on the deed, you can actually look that up in county records.
That's right.
Yeah, yep. Even online, you can
Yep.
look that up. It's public.
Public record. Yep.
Yeah. All right, step 4, special circumstances. It's hard to think of every kind of unique circumstance that's going to come up. And it's important to talk to an attorney because they're going to have a lot of insight on the things that might come up in your particular situation. So, yes, so I've seen families who have appointed co-trustees in their trust who don't agree with anything, and the trust was loosely worded. Right. Which if you don't do that through the right channels, it's not going to be as clean cut as it should be. So it's very, very important to be able to have those professionals to walk you through that. And things like an advanced healthcare directive. I have one of those in place. How about you, Matt?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, it's super important. I have one.
I don't want the guilt of pulling the plug to be on my family, right? Yeah. I want them to say that was Dad's wishes. How awful to saddle that onto your family members. Absolutely. Yeah. And we've met families where there wasn't one in place and they did have to make that decision. Yeah. And it's really, really hard. And they never know if they made the right decision. Right. Exactly. But power of attorney is very important too. One thing that is a misnomer about power of attorney is it ends at death. So even if you have someone who you've given power of attorney to, that does not include the estate affairs after passing. That's exactly right. We hear this all the time. Oh, it doesn't matter. I'll go change the bank account because I have power of attorney. Well, you can't represent someone. Power of attorney means I represent you, right? I can act in your behalf. You can't act in behalf of someone who's died. You just can't. And so power of attorney is gone, right? And that's when you need an executor, and that's changed. And so it does end upon death. The very moment they pass away, power of attorney is null and void.
That's absolutely true. I think that's one of the biggest misnomers, especially in our hospice families, is that they think, oh, we already did all this so that I could be the one to help mom. And then they get to that point and they didn't do the estate planning side to be able to carry it out efficiently. So
That's exactly right. Yeah, that causes a problem. Before you jump to the next slide, going back to that, something that people don't think about that maybe an attorney would. We got this great story last week from our attorney partner who came in, or one of our attorney partners, and he talked about they didn't have clauses in there. What if your kid is going through a divorce? What if they're going through bankruptcy? What if they're in jail? What if they have high levels of addictions right now and they need to get? Do you really want someone who is a complete alcoholic and their life is in ruin to have $100,000? That could kill them, right? And he talked about a poor kid who they didn't have those types of safeguards in place. The kid was barely 18 and his parents passed away and left him with a life insurance policy that was, what was it, like $2-3 million?
yeah,
$2 or $3 million. Nobody should be giving an 18-year-old $2 or $3 million carte blanche, right? And if it would have been a trust that he wrote, it would have not allowed that, right? It would have been, yeah, we can release money for schooling, but what did the kid do? He went and bought a Ferrari, and then he went and bought Indian motorcycle, and then he went and bought a Corvette and started buying all these really, really nice vehicles in cash. And 6 months later, he wrecked it because it was too big of a machine for him to handle, and he died. And this attorney was like, that was to a large extent the parents' fault, which is, I think, harsh, really, really hard to hear. But that's what this is why you need to talk to an attorney in setting these things up, because they're going to think of situations, they've seen situations that I wouldn't think about that at all. I'd just be, let's be fair and divide it amongst my 6 kids. Well, there's more parameters than that, right? And so they're going to help you with that.
And the other things like special needs trust could be put in there too. If you have a disabled child you want to take care of.
Great point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are so many different parts of estate planning, and it can be so customizable to your individual situation. It's super important to get a trusted professional, not just one you call out of the phone book, but actually someone you know you can trust to help you through that process. And it is never too early to think about estate planning. Never. You never know what's going to happen in the future. I'm a perfect example of this. At 38 years old, my husband passed away in an accident, and we hadn't even had an inkling of estate planning. Like when you're before 40 years old, it's just not on your radar. But if you have children and you have a home and you have assets, it really, really needs to be addressed.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And thanks for sharing that, because you're right. An estate plan is, you can't do it in that moment. In the moment of an emergency, or after it's been done, then you're up a creek without a paddle. So you have to put a plan together. A couple pieces on this. Attorneys can help you with the legal side. You should also do a couple other items. One, make a plan for at least a few of your personal items. And this is coming personally, but I had a situation where I had 4 kids in the family. Dad had passed away. Mom had passed away a few years previous. The family, the siblings were at each other's throat, fighting over these personal assets. There was such a loss of connection, and they were looking to get those personal assets to connect with their father. And in particular, these 2 brothers were going at it over this shotgun. They both wanted Dad's shotgun. And it was like really, really getting heated. Well, thank heavens, they found a letter from the father to their kids. And
oh, wow.
He said, hey, I want, Doug to get the shotgun. I remember that morning waking up early, going hunting, and I felt like we really connected on that talk. And I want you to have that, because I remember that connection with you, and it really carried me through my life. However, I want my car to go to Robbie, because I remember teaching you how to drive and you really struggled with it, but then you got so good at it. And anyway, it had this big story of these couple items. And guess what? Robbie didn't want that shotgun anymore. All he could think about was getting the car, right? And Doug didn't want the car. He just wanted that shotgun to connect with his dad. And that dad doing that created such a service. So if you can take a moment, I don't think you have to do every single item in the home, but name one or two items that you want to go to each of your heirs with a story and a personal reason. I'm telling you, it will save relationships and make them feel connected to you afterwards. The second thing, part of an estate plan that no one's going to talk about is a funeral plan,
Yes.
right? Like, you shouldn't go to the grocery store while you're hungry. You should.
No.
I just did this morning. I had a doctor's appointment and I realized I didn't have anything at the office for breakfast. So I ran to the grocery store to get a couple items for breakfast. I walked with $90 later. I got all these snacks and things that I could, I mean, that's just how it is. You shouldn't go to the grocery store when you're hungry. You shouldn't be planning a funeral while you're grieving.
Yeah.
And so if you can plan that funeral for your children before you pass away. My dad passed away a year and a half ago. We walked in, the funeral director said, Kate, this is what your dad's plan was. Done. We don't get along with my siblings, but we had zero contention. And we shouldn't have had to have contention in the moment of grief. So getting a funeral plan in place, also very, very important. And the third piece that I'm always going to harp on, have life insurance.
Yeah.
Please. If you have children, if you have a spouse, unless you're much older, I don't think my dad didn't need life insurance in 80, right? He died without life insurance and it was fine. We had enough assets to cover debts. We had an employee who came and worked here, and her first day on the job, I said, do you have life insurance? Young family. And she's like, no. And I said, please go get it. Because if tragedy were to occur with all the grief, the last thing you want to be thinking about is, now what do I do financially too?
Yeah.
Right. And so just remove that component. Term life insurance is so cheap. I still have a plan from when I was in my mid-20s that's about to expire. It's just a term and policy. It's like $500,000. I pay like $18 a month.
That's a good deal.
It's cheap, right? And just the peace of mind of that. I'm so glad I didn't have to use it, or my wife didn't have to use it. I'm still alive, but it's about to expire, and I'm so glad I paid that money over that amount of time. But anyway, this employee, she went and talked to her husband. They both got life insurance, and about 2 years later, he ended up passing away. And oh, like the shock of that. And then she goes, oh wait, we got life insurance. And now all of the stress that just hit her, how am I going to help my two young girls with losing their father? How am I going to deal with those next steps? At least she didn't also have to think, how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to keep my home? How am I going to buy groceries? She didn't have to think about that piece. She was taken care of financially. She could focus on her grief and her girls and the next steps without that piece. So please go get life insurance, in addition to looking at wills and trusts, if you're younger especially, and then also a funeral plan.
Yes. So important. So important.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you need help with this, we work with attorneys all over the country. And so we don't do planning, right? Because our job is after someone's passed away, and oftentimes we're helping them find a probate attorney or find a local person to maybe help them with an affidavit of small estate or something like that. But we have amazing connections to really trusted, wonderful individuals. That doesn't help us in any way, but we are happy to help you. So if you know of someone who needs some help with this or needs help with like a funeral plan, we can help you find a really good funeral home to get that done. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us.
Yeah, we're here and passionate about helping people through these kinds of situations. That's why we do this show. That's why we're at the office every day doing what we do, helping families. And education, it's huge. If we don't know we need to know these things, then you end up not planning for what you need to plan for.
Yeah. And the thing is we will all die.
Yep.
None of us are getting out of this, right? There's only one way this all ends. So So you can either put your head in the sand, which will mean you'll leave a mess for your family to deal with.
Yep.
Or you can do an ounce of prevention to deal with that pound, better than that pound of cure later on. Just that ounce of prevention, make a little bit of a plan, make sure things are updated. It's really not that expensive. And it really will not only give you peace of mind, but it'll be such a gift to your family members.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So part 2 of this series we're doing is going to be about probate, kind of a deep dive of that. Family's biggest concern, probate, because everyone's afraid of that. So we're going to dig in, we're going to learn a little bit more. And that is going to be August 1st at 1 p.m. So we'll see you guys then, and hit us up if you have questions.
Yeah, love it. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.